1986, Nintendo released what would be the first in what would become the Metroid franchise. A partnership between Nintendo and Intelligent Systems, produced by Gunpei Yokoi, inventor of the D-pad, and directed by Satoru Okada. Focusing on exploration as the bounty hunter Samus Aran, traversing the caverns of the planet Zebes in order to eliminate the titular Metroids, a genetically engineered race of parasitic life forms bred as weapons by a group of space pirates that drain the life force of anything they encounter, ultimately infiltrating their base, defeating their leader Mother Brain, and ending their plans once and for all. Metroid, a portmanteau of Metro and Android, was heavily influenced by films such as Ridley Scott's Alien from a few years before. This influenced multiple aspects of the game, such as making the protagonist, Samus Aran, a woman, something that was still quite rare in games at this time. The primary art and creature design of Alien was a Swiss artist called H.R. Geiger. His dark and unique biomechanical art style became another major influence for the tone of Metroid, with a lot of the game's low-res world mimicking this style. As mentioned before, exploration was a huge part of Metroid. Players frequently having to retrace their steps in order to proceed, as new weapons and upgrades are discovered in order to unlock the path forward. This style of open-ended, exploration-heavy gameplay, with a focus on permanent upgrades, became the basis of what would become the Metroidvania genre. Another portmanteau, this time of Metroid and Castlevania, another early title on the NES released by Konami. Metroid was both a critical and commercial success when it released in 1986, going on to sell well over 2 million copies, eventually making it the second most successful game in the franchise. It spawned a franchise consisting of more than a dozen of the games that continues today. After the release of Metroid Fusion on the Gameboy Advance in 2002, work began on the next game in the series. A developer who worked on Fusion initially pitched the idea that the team port Super Metroid from the SNES to the GBA. The new game would be directed by Yoshio Sakamoto, who had been involved in every Metroid game so far bar 2 on the Game Boy, including the director role on Super Metroid. He decided that rather than porting the SNES classic, they would remake the NES original. While Fusion received near universal acclaim, it was often noted that it was a far more linear experience than previous titles, with a much tighter story-based structure rather than a more open-ended, exploration-heavy design of the previous titles. Sakamoto commented on this, saying they wanted to show people who were new to the series that this is how it all began. Metroid Fusion's engine was used for the remake, however it had to essentially be completely rebuilt to incorporate everything that the team wanted to do. A whole selection of new abilities and power was added to the original's gameplay, items such as the Charge Beam and the Speed Booster that had become synonymous with Samus over the course of the franchise life. This naturally affected the map design, areas had to be newly created or modified, and puzzles were added in order to incorporate the new abilities that Samus had acquired over the years. The map generally follows the layout of the original, however, and will instantly feel familiar to anyone who knows the original game well. A bunch of new mini-bosses and enemies were added and sprinkled throughout the campaign, taking the total number of bosses to be defeated from 3 in the original to 9. Most of these backed up with some cutscenes to give some context to their inclusion, though most of these are just local wildlife getting in the way. Metroid Zero Mission was first revealed to the public at E3 in 2003 and released the following year in the spring of 2004. The gameplay of Zero Mission doesn't differ much from the by now perfected formula. The focus on the exploration of a large, open-ended map returns, taking full advantage of Samus' new abilities. As open-ended as Zero Mission is, it's still scaled back a fair bit compared to the original. For example, once Samus has the Morph Ball in the NES game, a huge amount of the map becomes available, giving several options of where to go and what to do next. By contrast, Zero Mission has far fewer options available. This continues throughout too, with many areas being completely unavailable until the prerequisite upgrades have been acquired. There are far fewer optional upgrade items in this game than the original. This does encourage backtracking a little more, as players often become aware of paths or secrets that they can't quite access yet, only to be returned to later with the required abilities, rewarding them for taking the time to go off the main path. Fusion introduced a mechanic, if it can be called that, where the next objective was shown to the player at various points, highlighted on the map, more or less making it impossible to get lost or stuck. This being one of the factors that contributed to the far more linear feel of Fusion. This was included in Zero Mission through Chozo statues, however it was massively scaled back by comparison, given a general location to head towards, but without necessarily giving a clear reason as to why. Usually arriving at the specified area would trigger a cutscene, a boss fight, or some new key piece of equipment that would be available. It still feels a little like overkill to me, but it is implemented a lot better than in Fusion, which was aggressive in its railroading. That being said, the map function that was introduced in Super Metroid makes a welcome return, and is still really useful for keeping track of where you've been and where the upgrades you found but haven't managed to collect are, so they can be picked up later on when you've acquired the relevant ability to access them. There's a massive amount of these optional items to grab along the way. In my playthrough for this video, I went out of my way to get as many as I could remember to do. I think I did a pretty good job of it as well, only to find after the credits that I only managed to get 61% of the total. I missed almost half. As an aside, on a second playthrough, the upgrades and items in a given area are shown on the map to give you an idea of what you're missing. A nice touch if you decide to go for 100% completion. The original game can be pretty obtuse with its placement of secrets behind hidden walls that don't seem to have any obvious tells that they're there. This even extended to the way forward in the story on occasion. This thankfully isn't anywhere near as much of an issue. It's usually far more obvious in most cases that something is there. Metroid Fusion tightened up the controls from Super Metroid somewhat. Movement is very tight and responsive. Air control is a lot less floaty than previously, which admittedly takes a minute to get used to, but overall I think it's an improvement. This all transferred over to Zero Mission. Samus is a pleasure to control, even in handheld form with a few less buttons than that of a SNES controller. Being a remake, the story of Zero Mission closely follows the script of the original outlined at the beginning of the video. Samus travels to Zebes to destroy the Metroid infestation, defeat Mother Brain, and put an end to the space pirate plans. An entirely new section was added, however, taking place after the defeat of Mother Brain, what would be the end of the original game. Samus escapes the self-destructing Turian and leaves Zebes on her ship. Unfortunately, space pirates are waiting in orbit and shoot her ship down, sending her crashing back down to the planet's surface, destroying her power suit in the impact. This new section tasks Samus with searching the temple known as Chozo to reclaim her suit and powers, and infiltrating the space pirate mothership. During the majority of this, Samus is armed only with a pistol that can open doors and freeze enemies in place for a brief few seconds. It's predominantly a stealth section. Eventually, a fully powered up version of her suit can be found, after passing the ruins test deep within Chozo. This transforms Samus back to an unstoppable badass, tearing through any enemies that are unfortunate enough to stumble across her, with some even actively hiding in many of the same spots used earlier on. She backtracks through the ruins in the mothership, eventually coming across the final boss of the game, Mecha Ridley. A fearsome, albeit incomplete robot version of the space pirate leader Ridley. This confrontation ends up being somewhat anticlimactic though. It's significantly easier than its living counterpart. Upon defeat, the ship's self-destruct system activates and Samus making her escape in a space pirate ship. Upon release, Zero Mission received high praise and critical acclaim. It received criticism for its length, however, with many outlets at the time commenting on how they wished it was a longer experience. In my opinion, this is a somewhat valid criticism. I've by no means mastered the game and can easily get through it in a few short hours. I don't feel like anything is missing from the experience though, nor is there any padding. It's a great example of a game being only as long as it needed to be. Nintendo Power ranked it the 46th best game of any Nintendo system in 2010, and IGN considered it to be the 9th best game on the Gameboy Advance. Metroid Zero Mission is a fantastic remake of a classic game, and one that I regularly go back to. The original is not a particularly easy game to get into these days, and the refinements and updates made help make this iconic title all the more accessible. It's a perfect way to get into the franchise if you're not already a fan. The only downside is that it's not the easiest game to actually play these days. And by that, I mean Nintendo is continuing their tradition and making their legacy titles difficult to obtain. As of right now, there are only a couple of methods of playing Metroid Zero Mission. The first is rather obviously an original copy on a Gameboy Advance. This can be quite expensive though if you don't already own it. Authentic pre-owned Gameboy Advance games have been steadily rising in price over the last few years, to the point where it's almost becoming prohibitively expensive now in some cases. The other option is via the Nintendo eShop. Zero Mission is available on Wii U and 3DS consoles currently. While this is fine for the moment, neither of those are current consoles anymore, and it only remains a matter of time before these stores are closed down. Thank you for watching. As always, if you managed to get this far into the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing.